Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of the Olympia Tools Turbo Pliers, automatic self-adjusting pliers. And I'll be doing a quick comparison. Now, I've talked about pliers similar to these a lot earlier, these robogrips, and in that review I was indeed operating them incorrectly. Even though I've since corrected that, I never get never-ending comments about it. As well as a comparison to similar types of, this is a Cobalt self-adjusting wrench plier, and then of course the Knipex manual adjusting wrench pliers. Now these Knipex, and I'm sorry I am not pronouncing it correctly, I have a lot of trouble with that, and you'll just have to bear with me. But the Knipex are considered really the premium or some of the very best made of these wrench pliers. And similar types of pliers, they have smooth jaws and they don't mar up anything. Because the pivot point is so close to the jaw, you get a huge amount of leverage, and then the geometry on them, once you actually put them on a fastener, you can actually get them to hold on just by putting pressure on one handle. These Cobalt wrench pliers are actually a similar system as these Knipexes. However, they have serrated teeth on them, so they're a little bit different, and obviously these Cobalts, as I mentioned in the reviews earlier, are much more poorly made, but they do have a locking lever that kind of keeps them in place. And now these are self-adjusting, so these kind of combine aspects of these as well as aspects of these robogrips. Now, enough talking about all of these different pliers. We're really here to talk about these Olympia Turbo Pliers because they are similar to the robogrips. These aren't considered wrench pliers, these are self-adjusting pliers. But Olympia, as you can see here, is actually re-engineered the pliers, and I actually think that they're quite a bit better than the Ridgid robogrips. Several things to start off with. Versus the robogrips, these Olympias are heavier. They easily feel like they're 20% heavier. There's no question. There's definitely more steel for the similar handle length plier than there is in the robogrips. The robogrips are made very simply, even though these are made in America. They work fine, but they do have kind of an interesting jaw setup, especially on these large ones where you have like kind of a hex portion there, a flat jaw. So this is supposed to work both with hex fasteners as well as round objects such as pipes and that kind of thing. Now, how these are supposed to work is when you turn, you have to be careful what direction, because you want the moving jaw, the handle that is the moving jaw, is the one that you want to put pressure on. And so the idea is that once you put a lot of pressure on the handle, it starts locking up tighter, and that's how they generally work. But some of the issues with them particularly is these small teeth, and although these have worked out okay for me, once they kind of get beat up or get grit in there, they tend to want to slip, especially grit, because grit will prevent them from fully seating. And then once they start slipping and rounding out the teeth, it's kind of downhill from there. What I find interesting about the Olympias is kind of like those Cobalts. They do have a lock switch, which I like, but then they have like this double pivot action. So when you get the pressure on, we can see that both this lower part and upper part move at the same time, and it really seems like you get quite a bit more leverage. You don't have to put quite as much force on what would be considered the upper handle or the moving jaw handle to get the same amount of grip as you do with the robogrips. The robogrips, even if you're using them in the correct direction, still have to put quite a bit of force, and these Olympias just a lot easier to use. The second thing that Olympia has done, as you can see, is they use very deep cutouts for the adjustment teeth, and they are much less likely to slip. Obviously, there has to be a whole lot more crud that's built up into those teeth, and they're pretty darn large, so I did appreciate that as well. And they work nicely. They having the extra steel versus the robogrips really seems to make them feel a lot more sturdy and rigid. No pun intended with the brand of that tool. So I just wanted to do a quick review showing them. The small ones are similar, but they don't have curved jaws. They just have flat jaws. This also has a locking switch, but for some reason it just doesn't really work too well. As you can see, it's in the lock position, but the plier still opens halfway. And if we slide that back, then it will work normally. And once again, when you press your hand on the handle, it really just snaps right into place, and really you feel like you get a lot more pressure, a lot more leverage with these Olympias than you do with the robogrips. They're not similar to these wrench pliers because still the pivot point's a lot farther away from the fulcrum or from the working portion versus like the Cobalts and the Knipexes, or Knipexes. I'm sorry, I keep screwing that up. But nonetheless, they do seem to work quite well and give you a lot of force. So I really appreciate how they've done that, and I think that's part of it is because of this extra compound action. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but they definitely do work better having this more complex mechanism than the robogrips themselves do. And although they're not wrench pliers, they really do seem to work pretty well for wrenching. You know, if you just grab something, they really just hold on tight. I know this is just a loose hose clamp, but they really, as far as a general use self-adjusting plier, much better than the robogrips. I can definitely tell you that. And I generally recommend them over the robogrips. Anyway, I had just picked these up, and so used, of course, and saw that they were significantly different from the robogrips or the other types of adjusting type wrench pliers or automatic adjusting pliers, and so I just wanted to put a review out there and kind of compare them to some of those other units that I have, and to let people know that not all pliers and obviously not all self-adjusting pliers are created equal, and these Olympias are actually better than the Ridgid robogrips and of course the Craftsmans and any of the other knockoffs of these pliers. These are definitely cheaper. The design and engineering, these are definitely more complicated. There's more rivets and more mechanism involved, but it really does seem to work well. You know, the biggest issue really with these is just the fact that the lock doesn't work particularly well. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the review there, but I really appreciate everybody watching and everybody who has subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed to the Catus Maximus channel, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.